Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Beyond the Superficial. We are chiropractors and functional medicine practitioners at Synapse Center for Health and Healing, located in Eagan, Minnesota. Information shared in this podcast is not intended to diagnose or treat any medical conditions. Please consult with a primary care provider before engaging in any new activity or protocol. With that in mind, let's dive into this episode.
Another episode of Beyond the Superficial. We are providers here at Synapse Center for Health and Healing in Eagan, Minnesota. My name is Dr. Amber Genetzky. I'm a chiropractor, functional neurologist, functional medicine doctor, and I do acupuncture here at the clinic.
And my name is Ellie Samborski. I'm a trauma practitioner and a wellness somatic coach here with Synapse. I work with stress management, emotional regulation, and helping people with trauma resolution.
Thank you for joining. Today, we're going to be talking about reasons why we're not sleeping during hormonal changes, particularly in times of perimenopause and menopause. So this affects so many people. So it's a big topic that we're going to dive into a little bit today. The first thing we're going to talk about is hormonal shifts. Like, what is going on? What are some of the hormonal reasons why we are getting poor sleep? The first thing I'll bring up is just melatonin is dropping during this time as well. And so that just affects your ability to get into a deep, restful sleep. And then progesterone also, if progesterone is dropping, and progesterone has the ability to stimulate your GABA receptors in your brain that helps produce GABA and helps you relax, and that can get you into more restful sleep as well. So when those things are going off, there's lots of other stuff that we're going to dive into a little bit later with how estrogen comes into play with this as well. But those are two, really obvious ones, and those are where I see a really good improvement when people are actually supplementing or getting bioidentical hormone replacement therapy with sleep. Is progesterone in particular, it really helps with getting back to a regular night's sleep.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how many women will, sometimes that's kind of their early sign of, I'm actually entering menopause, is recognizing that, 2, 3 a.m. wake up call, and they're just wide awake, can't fall asleep, and are doing all the things. I've talked to so many women where they're going to try, prayer and meditation, mm-hmm. and it still doesn't work, instead of realizing, right, this is actually part of our hormones playing a big part in our sleep.
Yeah. And really, it's not something that you can talk yourself out of. Mm-hmm. You can't be like, I'm going to get myself to fall asleep. It really is an autonomic nervous system response. And so, don't beat yourself up. But we're also going to talk about, why do we wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning? Like, why is that such a common time? I think that's kind of weird. Like, why all the time? It's like just a natural alarm clock that wakes me up. So I'm just going to dive into this first, and we're going to be talking about just areas of the brain. And so we're just going to hone into the ventral and dorsal areas of the brain that can kind of come into play here. So the ventral system, I'm just going to keep it simple, is like the amygdala. Okay. And then the dorsal system are things like your prefrontal cortex and your hippocampus. And these areas are not only modulated by estrogen, but they keep each other kind of in check. And we need a really good dorsal system to keep the ventral system under control. The ventral system is kind of what I explained is where your emotions are coming from. And so, for example, if you have experienced trauma, that area of the amygdala, that might be a little bit hyperreactive on you. And we have to then use our bigger areas of the brain, that dorsal area, to control that even more. Well, what happens is estrogen really helps the health of the dorsal areas. The hippocampus, I'll just keep it simple with that, hippocampus and prefrontal areas, the health is really strengthens with estrogen. So as estrogen comes down, those areas don't function as well. And the ventral the ventral area starts to become unchecked. And that's one reason why we might wake up at 3 a.m, is because the dorsal areas control what's called non-REM sleep, non-rapid eye movement sleep. And that type of sleep is a little bit more part of the first half of the night, mm-hmm. until like 3 a.m. And you get into like a deeper sleep with that, because it's keeping that ventral area in check. And then after that, we are in a little bit of a lighter sleep, and we're more likely to wake up to little disturbances like your partner snoring or something moves that, your dog gets up, something like that, then we wake up. Okay. And so that's what's going on when we start to lose some estrogen. Those areas that control the ventral area are just not as healthy. And then we add stress to it, and then it just makes it even worse. And so I'll let you kind of talk about like, what can we do to maybe improve that check on the amygdala by improving prefrontal cortex and hippocampal control of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so just how Dr. Amber mentioned that there's a dorsal and a ventral part of your brain, your entire nervous system actually has, kind of the front part of you is called the ventral, the back part of your nervous system is called the dorsal. They're both branches that go to different parts of the brain. And so different activities can actually stimulate those parts, whether it's calming down the amygdala, the ventral part, or kind of activating and building up the dorsal, which is that prefrontal cortex, our reasoning, our decision making, kind of the part of us that brings our personality out. So I usually kind of marry two things here. If there's trauma, if there's stress, if there's emotional ruptures, if there's a lot of things that women are having to carry, or just the stress internally or environmentally of their body changing, what we could do is help work with that survival energy. So that fight or flight that kind of goes through your amygdala and how your body responds. So for some women, it looks like I'm stressed all the time, I can't relax. For others, it's I'm depressed and I'm crying all the time. Sometimes it's a combination of both. So that's where we will utilize a lot of what's called somatic practices, which is working with your body to bring awareness and recognize what's happening internally. Instead of beating ourselves or shaming ourselves for the responses, we kind of get curious about what's happening in our nervous system. And then there's certain kind of practices that I will teach my clients to do that will help, depending on what state you're in, will require different exercises, right? Whether we want to activate a little bit more energy or bring down and calm down that energy, whatever is feeling trapped. So that's kind of the release part. We want to release any of the charge that your body is still holding onto and it's looping. But another big part that's important that you have to marry the two is actually rewiring your brain, right? If we're just discharging trauma energy and survival energy or that fight or flight, but we're not getting to the root of the pathway where your brain keeps re-triggering and replaying those scenarios or those experiences for you, it looks like either doing mindfulness, I'll do meditative prayer. Also, breath work is really important, where we actually teach our body and our nervous system to calm down and kind of shift gears between those two parts of our brain instead of having our ventral limbic system kind of just run haywire and run the show here.
Yeah, another thing I'll talk about is just exercise, because if you listen to me talk, I love exercise.
Mm-hmm.
And when we move our body, we move our joints, we are stimulating that nervous system and pumping up those dorsal areas for better control as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another practice. We also do some other things at the clinic here, like we have some heart math, and do you do safe and sound protocols? Yeah, safe and sound.
Yeah.
Here at the clinic, those are great ways to get that amygdala area to calm down, so those other areas can increase and control better. So yeah, that's really good.
I love mentioning that too, because sometimes people think, well, I just need to stay more calm, right? And they'll do all the things like I mentioned, breath work and prayer and somatic practices to calm down, without realizing sometimes we actually have to stretch our body into a little bit of a stress state, whether it's exercise, which is a great way to do it because it's controlled, or kind of challenging ourselves to heal some of our traumas, some of the things that are keeping us in that hyperactive state.
Yeah, and then we get kind of in a cycle too. When we get poor sleep, those areas of the dorsal get even worse because they need that deep sleep to really improve and function. And so you get in this bad cycle. I always tell my patients, well, not always, but sometimes I tell my patients, don't go through perimenopause and then go through a stressful time, and then don't go through perimenopause, a stressful time, and get in a car accident where you might have a concussion. All those areas, all of that together is just a recipe for disaster. So looking for areas in your life to minimize and reduce stress was very helpful too. What about methylation? It's kind of a buzzword out there, MTHFR and then COMT. Those are some genes that are associated with this pathway. How does that come into play when we are trying to improve sleep?
Yeah, so I love that this gets mentioned. That's something that I discovered early on with a lot of the people that were seeing me. Was sleep was impacted, and then once we started looking into methylation, realized some people have genetic SNPs that will get in the way of how they metabolize their energy. So the things that create energy in your body, and that's with MTHFR. And so looking into what is missing specifically, we'll do a test that lets us know exactly where in the cycle where it's broken. And it looks like either introducing B vitamins or the supplements, using diet as well to help your body methylate appropriately. But one that I want to specifically talk about is COMT. And so it's a genetic SNP. People can have one variant or both. And what happens is when you have COMT, your body kind of creates a bottleneck where you get stressed and your body reacts to the stress with catecholamines. So that's adrenaline, dopamine, epinephrine, and all of that gets dumped in the system. And after the stressor is gone, it should be able to kind of digest and process and get metabolized in our body. But when there's methylation issues or there's genetic SNPs that are preventing methylation, what happens is there's this kind of bottleneck that happens. And so we have a burst of all of these catecholamines, but they have nowhere to go. And so what that looks like is it's harder to kind of get through stressful moments. There can be, again, more crying, more reactions. And for many people, it impacts sleep very deeply, where you can either lose motivation because that dopamine doesn't have a place to go. Or for some, it's as soon as it's time to go to bed, my mind is racing and I'm wide awake and I can't slow down and I can't seem to calm down. And what that lets us know is your body actually has a ton of catecholamines and kind of things that are stressing you out, that are bringing energy and generating it. They're stuck in the body. And so with once we discover that, I'll usually help people create more routines and rhythms that can help their body. Just because stress, they're a little bit less resilient, if you will. Their body likes to hold on to stress a little bit more than they would like. And so it looks like inviting some practices. Sometimes it looks like adding some supplements. Something that I love to include for a lot of people is magnesium glycinate, just helping their nervous system calm down, letting their muscles calm down. Because a lot of those catecholamines will actually get kind of in the fascia where we're creating a lot of that energy. So it feels like we're buzzing and have a lot of energy, or our mind can get really, really loud and be running quite a bit at night. And so just recognizing if that's a pattern, maybe looking into getting some testing for genetic SNPs. And then from those tests, we would take a look at that assessment and see what do you need specifically and where can we supplement so that this isn't a bigger issue than it needs to be.
And we can run that test here in the office. We find a lot of cool things. I'll just like to touch point on the cortisol levels too, and increasing that HPA axis. I find this pretty fascinating when you kind of think about it. Same thing as sugar and insulin and the insulin receptor, that chronic release of insulin when you eat too much sugar, that insulin receptor becomes just like desensitized because it's chronically being stimulated by insulin. Well, the same thing happens in your hypothalamus with cortisol. So when you're in a chronic stress state, you're chronically releasing cortisol, and that cortisol receptor that's supposed to be a negative feedback to the HPA axis and actually reduce more cortisol from getting released, that receptor becomes desensitized, and we need more and more cortisol then to get that negative feedback. And so that's that dysregulated HPA axis that we talk about. And estrogen comes into play here too with that, because estrogen actually lowers cortisol. And so when estrogen starts to go down, estrogen starts to go down, cortisol can start to rise. Same thing, that comes to play too. As estrogen starts to rise, cortisol can come down. Well, we need the right amount of cortisol. So you can see how that female cycle down a lot. We start to get that cortisol kind of coming into play and getting lots of different effects with it as well. So it's really interesting. Yeah. Another thing with methylation that's common is having a tongue tie. So some people who have methylation issues genetically will also have a tongue tie, which can affect your ability to get into a deep sleep at night because the tongue can't rest. And so this can be a source of sleep apnea. And so when patients come to the office, we check for that tongue tie, in addition to doing maybe a methylation panel. And then we also have a watch pat test here that is FDA approved for finding obstructive sleep apnea. So some other things that we can dive into as well. So exercise can come into play with cortisol. And what we're going to talk about now is like, how do we help where do we exercise to help that natural circadian rhythm? And we've talked about this before in other podcasts, but it's really important, if you can, as much as you can, is to exercise in that morning time, because exercise starts to raise your cortisol. It should be highest in the morning, and then it helps it come down into that evening, into that rest state. So that's really important there. And then another reason that sometimes we don't sleep is because cortisol is actually too high in the evening time too, partly because of what we've been talking about. But when that happens, like sometimes we'll run a Dutch test here, which is a test to look at hormones. And one of the hormones that it looks at is cortisol. And sometimes I'll see that cortisol really high in that morning time, which we want, but not when it's too high, when it's outside normal range. That can be indicative of high cortisol throughout the night. And that, again, you're not going to sleep well if that cortisol is spiking you, and you might wake up feeling like really charged, or like in that just scared moment, like you just feel like you're scared for some reason, heart's beating. I'll talk to people about balancing your blood sugars a little bit too, because sometimes people will like to have ice cream before bed or a sweet snack before bed, watching TV, two things that aren't good for sleep. And what happens then is that spike in blood sugar then drops. And what happens is cortisol then is released to try and balance that blood sugar, because it helps kind of maintain the blood sugar level. So we get that little cortisol bump. And so what I'll work with patients is, hey, maybe we have a snack of protein, fiber, or fat before bed to try and balance that blood sugar a little bit better. And everyone's different. Sometimes people, if they eat before bed, it keeps their digestive system up, and then they don't sleep well. It's something you have to try. It's more for patients who are having issues balancing that blood sugar. They might be having a reactive hypoglycemia. And that's where having a little snack of fiber, fat, or protein before bed can sometimes improve that sleep at night. Yeah. How about tips for improved sleep? Do you have any, Ellie?
Yeah, I know that we had a whole podcast. So if you guys really want to get the whole lowdown, go ahead and check that out. But what comes to mind is, for me specifically, I'm very sensitive to light. So I have some red lamps that I've kind of changed out, or I have a salt lamp in my room. So I'm really conscientious about the lighting.
So reducing the overhead light.
Yep, yeah. And blue light. So whether it's TV or my phone, right? You can do different features on your phone that actually kind of make it go to sleep, or dim it after a certain amount of time, or you can manually do that. So I just kind of have a rule after 9 o'clock. I try not to touch my phone, be on social media, do any of that. It's time for my phone to go to bed, and for me to just start to kind of slow down a little bit, as well as I believe in creating routines. So something that's calming, that lets your brain kind of trigger you to, okay, this is time to get into sleep, whether it's taking a warm bath. I know some people will like to take a warm shower before bed, or something a little bit more, not too cooling, but something to just kind of help calm down their nervous system, brush your teeth, wash your face, read a couple, chapters in the book, whatever it is, creating a routine just so that there's rhythm and consistency for your brain to actually get engaged and kind of recognize that it's bedtime.
Which is like children, my kids, we turn off TV about an hour before bed, and we start reading books, and we start rubbing backs and feet and things that just calm their nervous system down to help them get to sleep. We kind of have to do the same thing sometimes, or we should. Another thing that a lot of my patients just get so much relief from is then that early morning light, is just getting out and seeing the light come up in the morning, or getting us in the winter months, getting a sun lamp to turn on during the day, or during those early morning times. That can be really helpful in reestablishing that circadian rhythm. Yeah. But I would agree, like a lot of this has been talked about in our other podcasts, and we dive into how to improve sleep on that one. So, but anything else you want to say here?
Yeah, I just think about, even for me, I know we mentioned something along this line, but just making sure, even with exercise, making that in the morning. I'll do some, regulating walks at night, but nothing too crazy. And for women specifically, if this is a moment, if you have someone who can give you some snuggles or cuddles and that feels safe, that can be really, really soothing for a woman's nervous system. We talked about cortisol, we talked about estrogen. And something that can come into play here is a little bit of oxytocin that can actually calm down a woman. So whether it looks like, coming up to your pet and giving them a snuggle, or snuggling in bed with your partner, giving your kiddos a hug, that has so many more benefits than just emotionally. It actually changes kind of the how your neurotransmitters respond in your body, and some of the stress chemicals. So kind of making a habit out of that. I'm always in support of it.
Yeah. Prayer meditation before bed is great too. Get that breath work in to activate that vagus nerve. Lots of research on prayer meditation, improving that prefrontal cortex and cortex area for regulation of that ventral area that we're talking about too. So that's a huge help too.
Yeah, that's an awesome one.
I'll just say one last thing before that woman waking up or man waking up at 3 a.m. A little trick that I've talked about before is just uniplanar hand movements. You just do really slow hand movements like this while you're laying in bed. Do it for 1 to 2 minutes. What that does is it actually calms down those areas of the brain that are hyped up, and it can kind of switch you into that sleep mode again. So you don't move your hand up and down. It's just easy, like petting a cat or rocking in a rocking chair. It's that same principle. Kind of puts the brain to sleep. Anything else?
No, I think this was great. Thank you guys for joining and listening in.
All right. We'll see you later. Bye-bye.
That concludes today's episode of Beyond the Superficial. Thank you for joining us, and stay tuned for more episodes. For more information, please visit our website, www.officialsynapse.com, your partners in healthy living for optimal life. We would love to hear from you on how our podcast might be impacting your life. We also want to hear what interests you. Please leave your feedback on our media page at www.officialsynapse.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll catch you in the next episode.